Welcome everybody to this well, we're talking about new skills and reality this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you happen to be. And this is a part of our pandemic web series. Let's just take a look at where we've been. Do you know, honestly, when we started back in March, I don't think we thought we would still be doing one a year later. For those of you who are keeping track of my diary, my pandemic diary, it's now volume 3. Volume 3 of the pandemic diary. And of course, you know, we've been through a whole set of emerging realities. And you can see this from the webinar, sort of starting with what's happening with families. Of course, certainly in the UK, we're locked down again. Children are at home again. So if those of you who are at home with your children, do take a look at that very first webinar, because that was really when we started talking about having kids at home and what we might want to think about with regard to that. So do take another look at that webinar. They're all available for you to download, of course. And then we sort of moved along, and where we are today is really to talk about skills. I think it's time we talked about skills. Let's just remind ourselves what's happening with skills. Certainly what's clear is the landscape is shifting. And that's why I've thought that today was a really important time to talk about this. I'm actually writing a piece at the moment for MIT Sloan on skills. And so this is a rehearsal really for the piece that I'm writing. So where you'll notice there's lots of Mentimeters and things, because I'm really interested to hear what you're doing as well. So the landscape of skills is shifting fast. And I wanted just to sort of stand back for a moment and look at what's going on. Almost before the pandemic hit. And so those of you who have been following my work and the work of my research advisory group, HSM, will know that we've been thinking about the skill shifts now for many years. Many of you on today are members of our Future of Work Consortium. Welcome, it's lovely to see you here. So you've been following us in that journey, and what the journey is really telling us is that the landscape of skills was shifting anyway. And here's some of the things that we've been following. Obviously, technology has played an enormous role in automation, and automation changes the nature of people's jobs, and it changes the nature of the skills that they need to perform those jobs. You know that my last couple of books, both The 100-Year Life and The New Long Life, also brought into that conversation demography. And basically the skills question there is that when you live for 100 years, as either you or your kids will do, it means that you have these really complicated multi-stage lives where you come in and out of different working arrangements. And that often means upskilling and reskilling. So long working lives really puts the agenda into how do I reskill to do my job better, or how do I upskill to change and transform? And in a long life, many of us are choosing to do that. We're actually reskilling ourselves. But there's also profound social trends. So for example, the fact that we're spending more and more of our money on services, be they personal services or services for our home, that changes the labour market, and it changes the sort of skills that people need. And so no surprise that when labour economists look at where the jobs were going to be and the skills that were associated with them, you can see that a whole new set of skills came up. Digital skills, obviously important. Remember that the shelf life of digital skills is very short. So whilst it's very exciting to either upskill yourself or indeed your employees in digital skills, remember that many digital skills are at the forefront of automation. They themselves will be automated. So digital skills have a very short, they're very valuable, but they have a very short shelf life. A huge increase in healthcare, in part because as countries become richer, they spend more and more money on their healthcare. And so if you take a look at the new frontier jobs, many of those are in healthcare. And even though that's an industry that's being automated, our appetite for staying healthy and being healthy only grows, as it does with our service skills. And then there's the really large area which is still not automated, which is caregiving. And in many of the countries that you live in, caregiving is a very large proportion of the working population. It's a growing proportion. It tends to be a highly gendered area. It's low paid, and it's got very poor automation. So these are difficult jobs. Some of you know that I serve currently as the co-chair of the World Economic Forum's Council on Jobs, and we're particularly interested in caregiving jobs to see how we can really think about the skills involved there. And then there's the green jobs. Now, I know that all across the world, your prime ministers, as indeed is ours, are telling us about the green revolution and how important the green revolution is going to be. We don't, by the way, see it as a massive increase in jobs. That it certainly will have an impact on the labour market, but it's not going to have the sort of impact that politicians are currently telling you. So the landscape of skills was always changing. But let's just take a look at what happened with COVID. And, you know, I've written a great deal about COVID. You've probably been to some of my earlier webinars about that. And of course, I've also been keeping a column at MIT Sloan about that. And it's causing, of course, enormous disruption. And I would say, you know, a couple of things about that. The first is that it is going to accelerate the automation agenda. And we hear that from many of the companies that we're working with. HSM is currently engaged in a whole bunch of work. And in fact, those of you who are members of the Future Work Consortium know that our next major masterclass, our workshop, is about automation. We've talked to a number of you about that already. The second is hybrid work. And hybrid work, which is the word that we're giving, seems to be the winning word at the moment in terms of the new working patterns where you both time and place become flexible. I've talked about that in our webinars. I have a piece coming out in Harvard Business Review in May about hybrid working. HSM are currently engaged with a whole bunch of companies supporting them on how to make that hybrid transition. That will change the nature of skills. And in a sense, you know, people now have a double disruption. They have the ongoing digitalization agenda, which is changing the nature of their work. And of course, has accelerated digital. The fact that we have more than 200 people here from all over the world talking comfortably about something is extraordinary. So we've all become digital natives. I know we used to think only the young could be digital natives, but now everybody, even people like me in our mid-60s, are suddenly becoming digital natives. And at the same time, we're going to move into a major recession. And that's really been one of the areas that I'm focusing on at the moment. How do we help people make these enormous transitions that they're facing? But I wanted to mention one other aspect of COVID, and that's about networks. I think that we have Emma Jacob on the line today. Hi, Emma. She wrote a wonderful piece in the FT at the weekend about how networks are changing. And this has been really one of the interesting stories about the pandemic. We talked about it right at the beginning, but it continues to really come out as a story. And the story is really about how do you use your skills? What role do networks play in skill development? And one of the things that we're realizing is that our networks are shrinking. And that's very good for sort of being productive. I mean, we're very good at when your networks shrink and you spend more and more time with people just like you, which we're doing during the pandemic, you get better at doing what you normally do, i.e. you probably become slightly more productive. But what you lack there is what comes from two other types of networks. First of all, the networks that go across boundaries. These are the boundary spanning networks, which are very good at exploiting and exploring new ideas, exploiting, for example, the work that marketing is doing and the work that research is doing. So as those networks begin to collapse, then that's become a real problem in terms of the combination of skills, because we know that it's that skill combination that really Bonnie, yeah, it's Emma Jacobs, shout out for Emma Jacobs' article in the Financial Times on Sunday. We'll put it in the note that we're going to send you later. Lottie, if you could do that. We'll put the link in. And then, in terms of innovation, this is really what Emma was talking about. And in fact, I was talking about as well in that FT article. Real concerns about how do people, that marvelous combination of skills and knowledge that brings innovation, how is that going to help post-pandemic? So really interesting dialogue really about what's happening to skills and how skills are changing. Now, these are going to profoundly impact on the skills agenda. And certainly we're seeing that already in recent surveys of what it is that executives are talking about. So let's just remind ourselves that what's happening right now when those most recent surveys of what CEOs are saying. And, one thing that's happening is that people haven't been investing very much during COVID in skills development. CEOs are saying that they're struggling to put their intentions of upskilling into practice. They're concerned about the skills gap. Some of them are putting upskilling and reskilling as a priority, but very few are establishing learnings in the soft skills. And I want to just spend a moment speaking about this, because actually what we're seeing generally with the upskilling and reskilling agenda is that you're focusing on digital skills, which are relatively easy to upskill at scale using online programs. But what you're not really focusing on is those human softer skills. And this is very important, because one of the things that we're learning about skills is technical skills have a relatively low short shelf life, so they have to be upskilled a lot. But human soft skills like the capacity to listen to people, to be empathic, to make decisions, to create judgment, those skills have much longer shelf lives, and importantly, they also unlock technical skills. And so you need to be focusing on both of those skill groups. So skills are something that hasn't been really on the top of the agenda, but part of the reason I'm talking now to you about skills, and I'm writing my next MIT Sloan about it, is we need now to focus on the skills agenda. So let's start with one of those marvelous Mentimeters to find out what's on your mind right now. So if you go to www.menti.com and use the code 3441991, you'll be able just to write what it is your experience of skills shifts and development has been since COVID-19. And if you look in the chat box, and thank you everybody for chatting at the moment. I'm not monitoring the chat at the moment because I'm one of those pathetic people who can't talk and monitor chats. But here it is. So go to www.menti.com and use the code 344191 to to give you an eye, to talk to us about what your experience has been of skills, skill shifts, skill development. So are you seeing new skills coming up? Is there anything that you're doing in developing skills which you're particularly, you'd like to mention? So please, if you could put that in the Menti now, that would be really helpful. What's been your experience? Okay, the word cloud isn't working. There you are. We think we're such brilliant, oh, hang on. We think we're such brilliant technologists, don't we? But it turns out that it's not working. Okay, so let's move on. Can my team just ask me whether it's going to work for the others? Just whilst we're
talking. Hi, Lynda. It's Anne here. So I can see on the browser side. So I can give a quick summary of
that would be great.
Some of the main
Anna.
points. Oh, there we go.
It suddenly appeared. Thank you, thanks. So there we go. Technology did not let us down. So some really interesting points here. A big point about resilience. Yeah, we're going to use that. I think our next webinar is about that. Lot more online collaboration. Some of you know that HSM is a mystery. I love it. Yeah, I agree. It's a mystery. Some of you might know that HSM is now one of the world's leading providers of facilitated online conversations. We've never been busier, and we've never done it for bigger groups. So we're now talking to one organization about getting 100,000 people online to talk about something or other. So yeah, it's a lot is going online. Resilience is coming up quite a bit. One of the skills that you're talking about is leading virtual teams. Yes. Big focus on softer skills. That's very interesting. If any of you are doing anything interesting on teaching for softer skills, could you send me a note? And I will come back to you on that, because I'm really interested in writing something on softer skills, and we don't have very many interesting case studies right now. Yeah, digital, lots on digital. Listening skills. Okay, if you're doing anything interesting on listening skills, could you you can put, actually, if you put it in the chat with your name, we'll come back to you on that. Or alternatively, just drop me a note. So a whole bunch of stuff about human capabilities, communication, cut of spend. Yes, we've seen that as well, by the way. We think that quite a lot of companies are cutting their spend on training at the moment. By the way, important, because we haven't really ever been able to convince the CFO that any of this is doing anything. I'm going to talk about that later, actually. Network ability has declined. Yes, we've seen that right across the patch. And in fact, it's going to be interesting as we move out of COVID, which I'm told will be September. Then we'll have to see how we feel about getting back with each other again. It's been a long time. It'll have been a year and a half, of which, yeah. So yes, a number of people are saying we're really focusing on soft skills. So thank you for that. Just drop me a note, either in the big chat or personally to me. And we'll come back to you on that, because we're really interested in what you're doing on soft skills. So thank you very much for that. That's very interesting. Lots of different experiences I can see from that. Okay, so it looks as if we've got Mentimeter. So the point I really want to make today is that this is the time now to really focus on skills. And one of the points I want to make, and this comes out from a very interesting piece from the National Bureau of Economic Research on work experience. It's a US focused piece of research, but it's really interesting, and we'll certainly send you the link to it, because it's a very readable, it's a lovely piece of work, actually. And what they did was to follow, I think, 1,000 people in relatively low skilled jobs, to look at what happened to them. Did they become upskilled? And they found that more than half of them moved into higher paid jobs. And that's really that's one of the things I want to talk about today. And the reason I'm saying that is the World Economic Forum, as I mentioned earlier, which I co-chair the Council on Jobs and Skills at the moment. We're just about to bring out a report, which unfortunately is embargoed until the 25th, which I think is a few more days. Yes, so I'm not able to share it with you in detail. But one of the things we're going to show is that most CEOs now are saying, we think that skill development should happen on the job. Now, that's a really interesting change in focus. So what I wanted to talk about a bit today is, how do you ensure that people get upskilled in the jobs that they've actually done? And so what this showed is that half of the people who got higher paid jobs, i.e. they moved up, they upskilled to do a higher paid job, there were three things that they had in common. The first is they had the foundational skills, and that's really what I want to talk about in a moment. What are those foundational skills? The second is they did have personal initiative. So that's one of the things we've got to acknowledge, and I want to acknowledge as a humanistic psychologist, is if you want people to upskill, you have to engage their personal initiative. And the best way to get an adult at work to upskill is, we all know the answer to that, give them the opportunity to get paid more. It's really one of the major motivators for upskilling. And I think somewhere along the line, we've forgotten that. We've forgotten that the reason that any of us are prepared to spend our time as adults in the skill development is because we think we'll get a better job, either a more interesting job, or if you're on a low or medium pay job, you want to get paid more. So that's really important. And the third aspect is that they did some training. And I want to talk about all of those in the rest of this conversation we've got, because I think these are really important issues. Okay, so what I want to also introduce you to is this idea of gateway jobs. So one of the things we have to do in organizations is realize that there are some jobs that really help people move up. And these are some of the jobs that came out in the report that I've just mentioned. And what that sort of shows you is that these are jobs that help people move up. Let me give you an example of that in the next piece. So this is taken directly from that report, and it shows they use the notion of origin jobs, gateway jobs, and destination jobs. So these are the jobs that actually help you. So of all these jobs here, the retail salesperson then went into the gateway job, which is customer service representatives. That already gave them a higher price per hour. And that then moved into higher paid job. These were destination jobs. So one of the things I want you to think about today is, how do you think about your organization in terms of using jobs themselves as an escalator to higher paid, more skillful jobs? And that's the first poll that I want to ask today. So here's our first poll. How far have you got with upskilling and reskilling? And you can say yes to as many of these as you want to. So have you mapped the major skill families? i.e., do you know what the skills are associated with the jobs? Can you measure individual skills? Can you help an individual know where they are? Have you described the skills of the future so people know what they need to move towards? Do you know what the gateway jobs are in your organization? The jobs that really help people to accelerate and move forward. Have you put navigation processes in place? So can people navigate the complexities of the internal labor market, or have you done none of the above? How far have you got with the reskilling, upskilling agenda? We've mapped the major skill families, we've measured individual skills, we've described the skills of the future. We know what the gateway job, this is a long, complex list of stuff. I'll be interested to see how are we getting on with this? Give it a couple more seconds. I've got a whole team behind me. We need a couple more seconds. By the way, as you can see, we're brilliant at running virtual events. So if you have a virtual event that you think we could help you with in terms of content and process, give us a shout. We're happy to help. We've become enormously adept at this, as you can see, and we can do them for up to thousands and thousands of people. Okay, so where are we? We've mapped the major skill families. Well done. Half of us are saying that. That's good news. And the next thing we've described the skills of the future. That's also great. What we're not doing, and this is really why I brought it along today, because I didn't think you'd done it, and I'm very excited about this idea of gateway jobs. We know only 10% of us, 12% of us know what the gateway jobs are. For those who are doing that, just drop a note in the chat about what you're doing. We'd love to hear more about that. I'm going to write something about this for Sloan. So I'm still only halfway through my Sloan. So if you've got anything here, I still have time to bring your example in. So that would be good. Navigating processes in place. So that's really, really helpful. Thank you. So there's poll 1. Let's move on. I'm going to suggest that we need 4 skill agendas for the future, 4 actions for the future. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly because I'd like to make sure we've got plenty of time for Q&A. So 4 actions I'm going to go through. You're not going to be surprised that the first one is creating visible accelerators of mobility. I've been a member of the McKinsey group on adult learning for about 4 years now. We meet every year in Boston, and it includes a whole bunch of people, including the heads of many of the big learning platforms. What comes out as really the #1 issue on adult learning is it's really difficult, it's very time consuming, and people have got to be persuaded to do it. Nobody really learns stuff unless there's a very good motivator. The best motivator is you think you're going to do better at the end. And so these escalators of mobility are really important to actually help people understand what the jobs are that are going to help them to learn the skills which will move them into a higher paid job. The only example I've got of that right now is IBM. I'm sure there's other examples, and this is why I'm always very pleased to have so many people on these webinars, because it's a great opportunity for us to learn about what you're doing. But at the moment, the example I'm bringing to you is the IBM example of their chatbot, Micah, which actually is a chatbot which helps people, which recommends the jobs that they think people should be doing. So Mike, I think that IBM is furthest ahead on that. I was talking to them only last night actually about this. So they've got a back-end AI which does the matching, but the chatbot Micah actually talks to people about making recommendations of the sort of jobs that are going to be helpful for them, and then helping them understand the skills. So I think that the more that we can do to help people navigate the internal labor market, coming back to that piece of research I mentioned earlier, that most CEOs think that the on-the-job training, what happens in the job is the best way of developing skills. So we've got to help people find the jobs that help them to make those transitions, i.e. make visible the escalators of mobility. You're going to see that in my Sloan article, Escalators of Mobility. Action 2, ramp up. This is really the time to be making the argument for ramping up internal investments. We think that the investment in training skill training has gone down, but this is a really important time for those of you who have the ear of the CEO and have the ear of the CFO to say, this is now the time to make investments in that. And again, the company I'm going to talk about is AT&T. But if you're doing anything exciting, please drop us a note, because I've used the AT&T example before, and I'd like to have another. But what's really interesting about the AT&T example is that they looked at skill development as a whole system. So rather than just looking at it as something that you did, for individual job families, they looked at it as a whole system. And they also partnered with Coursera, Udacity, and so on, to actually build reskilling. And that meant that people actually got credentials. And I've spoken about this before, but one of the things that people want when they upskill is they want skills that will give them a higher paid job, but they also want credentials, because that helps their mobility. So, if you work with Udacity or Coursera, and I think some of you might have even built your own credentials, it helps people to credentialize their skill development. We know that's really important. So let's move on to the next Mentimeter, which is, what's your goals for your learning ecosystem agenda? What is it that you're trying to achieve right now? The money that you're spending on upskilling and reskilling, how are you spending it? And what are your goals for that moment? And thank you for all the questions that are coming in. We're going to take them. I'm going to open for questions in about 5 minutes time, or perhaps a little bit longer than that. But thanks for the questions, bring them in. So let's look first of all about what are your goals for the learning ecosystem agenda. I think it's just a type. So go into menti.com 3441991. And just be interested, where are you spending your money, basically? What is it? I know you've probably got less money to spend than you had. What are you actually doing with it? What are your goals for it going forward? Just type in and we'll just take a look at what you're saying. And do, by the way, we'll put it in the note to you, but do take a look at the World Economic Forum report on the future of jobs, which unfortunately, as I mentioned, is embargoed until the 24th of this month, but it's going to be worth taking a look at. And some really, I looked at it over the weekend, and there's some really interesting ideas there. What are your goals for your learning? Menti slide is not refreshing. Okay. Anna, Lottie, where are we on Menti right now?
So Menti, I can't see the answers on the back end in the browser. So what I would ask people is if you can put your answers in the chat box, and we'll be able to see your goals for learning.
So what Heidi and a few people are saying is that they can still see the previous Menti question. The new one isn't coming up.
So there should be a button to click through to the next one, but what we'll do, we can reload it from the back end, and then
Can you do that? Yeah, because we've still got one more poll to go, haven't we? So I think, given our timing, I don't want technology to annoy us now. Okay, if you just put it in the chats, that's great. And Anna, what sort of things are you seeing coming out in the chat about what people's goals are?
So we're seeing focusing on leadership and leading to learn, again, about leading in the complex world.
Yeah.
So that this leadership question and the capabilities you need, but also it seems what it means to be a leader.
Yeah.
As well.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, Sakamura's talked about 5 hours a week, mix of business, leadership again, and technology. So that kind of combination.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's really helpful. I mean, certainly we at HSM are doing some incredible learning ecosystem work at the moment. We're doing a whole bunch of work training people to think about the future, training them to think about how are we going to do, transition skills. That's really interesting. And we're certainly doing quite a lot of work on how do you support people to make the transition to hybrid work, particularly managers. It's going to be a really difficult management job. Just as an aside, I'm just about to start a big piece on what's the job of a manager. What's the new managerial job? If anyone's got any interesting things to say about that, either put it in the chat box or drop me a note. If you want me to interview you about that, I'd be really fascinated. I think it's all up for grabs at the moment. So that's really, really sort of fascinating. Okay, let's move on to the next point. And Anna, if you could just drop me a note about whether we should do the poll, we'll decide whether to do that. I think we should be thinking about tracking human capital value. And I know that a lot of you have gone down that particular rabbit hole. I'd gone down it and sort of given up with it, really. But I think it's sort of worth having another go at that. The World Economic Forum are doing quite a lot of work at the moment in terms of their accounting group on how would you account for human capital. You know, I think one of the reasons why our training budgets are going down and our learning budgets are going down is we're not accounting for human capital value. Most of what we're doing at the moment is simply to say, you know, what it is you're spending. You're talking about the spend, not the outcome. If anybody's doing anything interesting on tracking human capital value, again, could you put that in the chat? Because the World Economic Forum is very interested in looking at companies that are doing that right now. We don't really have many examples, but this is one idea in terms of that, which basically says, you know, if you, and let me just take you through the model. What the model is suggesting is that the value, you look at value added in terms of the market price of the talent that you've got in the organization and the investment you've made, but you also look at value reduction in terms of the skills you've had to make, people you've had to make redundant, and the loss of skills through attrition. So it's really based on the idea that you're building an internal capability, and you look at that constant build of human capital and human skills. But that, as you can see, is being done by a bunch of accountants. And whether any of you have got the appetite for that, I have no idea. I know my great friend Dave Ulrich has been working in this field for ages, but I don't know where we've got with it. So if you've got anywhere interesting, then just give us a shout on that. Let's take a look at the next poll. Anna, are we okay on this, do you think?
Yeah, the poll will be fine. It's on Zoom.
Okay. Oh, the poll's on Zoom. Okay. So does your organization track human capital value? Yes, we have a system that tracks it. We've got some of the tracking capability. It's on the agenda for the future, and it's not on our agenda. So let's just take a look at where we are, because it seems to me that if we want to really make the case for skill development, we've got to say to the CFO, you know, what's going on here? So does your organization track your human capital value? Does your organization track your human capital value? It's not on our agenda. Yeah, I must say that's only one. I think it's 4%. That's probably a couple of you are saying you have that. If you could just drop a note either to me personally or to everybody about who you are, that would be great to hear a bit more about that. So some of you are doing bits of it, but lots of you are saying it's either not on our agenda or it's on the agenda for the future. You're kicking it down the road. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for that. So let's see where we are on that. I got very excited about human capital investment some years back, and I've sort of given up, but let's not give up. Still stuff to do. Okay, I'm going to move to the fourth action that I think we need to play now, and that's about the development ecosystem. And really the point I want to make here is that much of what we think about when we think about skill development is about what we do inside the organization for our own people. I think that we need also to think about what is it that we're doing for the wider ecosystem. In a sense, rather than I'm speaking here as a strategy professor, it's not that you're arguing about the size of the piece of cake that you've got, but you're actually building the cake out. And that's a strategy 101 really, which is what you're encouraging people to do is to build the whole ecosystem of skills rather than fighting over a small number of it. And the technology companies have been doing this for some time, actually. We don't know that many examples outside of that. If you're doing anything about that, do drop me a note, because I'm writing that up as we speak, actually. I'm going to turn to Microsoft's role in developing an ecosystem, and Microsoft have done a lot of work and put a lot of cash behind bringing digital skills. They've set themselves they want to do they want to bring digital skills to 25 million people. They've put a relatively large small amount of money into it. They've identified the in-demand jobs, and they've got giving people free access to learning paths. So it's actually a really important point. But really what I'm saying in terms of the skills development ecosystem, governments can play a role. And those of you from Singapore know that Singapore is doing a lot there. Not-for-profits are actually really stepping up. And actually there's some amazing not-for-profits, particularly in the US, by the way, who are really, really supporting people through the transition, particularly low-skilled people. There's a whole bunch of for-profit providers like Udacity and so on, but companies really need to work on the whole ecosystem. So that's really my final point. Let me just remind you of the 4 actions I think that we should be taking right now in terms of skill development going forward. Number 1, I think it's really important that we make visible the escalators of mobility. If anyone's doing that, drop me a note, because I don't have enough examples of that right now. Secondly, we need to ramp up internal investments. Really, this is the time to make the case for the next year, especially as we move into hybrid. As I mentioned, my WEF colleagues tell me it will be September when things get back to any sense of normality. So as we budget for this year, we're budgeting both for lockdown, but also that transition into hybrid. And we need to think about how we're going to make that transition. What sort of skills do we need to make that transition? It would be sensible to have at least some conversations about how do you track and measure human capital investments. And it'd be interesting to hear that very few of you are doing that. I'm not surprised, but it'd be interesting to know more about what you're doing. And then fourthly, there are companies out there who are saying, the role that we play in the world isn't just about the role we play internally, it's also about the role we play externally. I know a number of you have got budgets to make a difference to the world in some sort of a way. I think that if you have particular sets of skills internally that you think the world could find useful, particularly human skills, actually. I think there's lots of companies working in the digital skill ecosystem. What's not being really covered is how do you help people outside of your organization build human skills? If any of you are doing that, that would be an amazing, amazing thing to bring to the world. So that's all that I'm going to say. Let me just, before we open up for questions, remind you about the next pandemic series, so that you can put it in your you can put it in your diary right now. Let's just take a quick look at that. Oh, sorry, mine is reversed. Okay, so the 16th of Feb is our next pandemic series. It's about resilience. I love it as a title. We basically can cover anything that seems to be important by that moment. I think this is the one where we're going to bring a client in to work with us. Every other series we bring somebody in to talk about this. So I think we're going to do that for this, and Emma and Harriet will be leading that. So that's going to be very exciting. But let's get on to questions. Anna, I think we're going to, over to you, Anna.
Thank you, thanks Lynda. And apologies, Zoom is not letting me turn my video, so you won't have the option to see my fantastic background here in Scotland. There's some interesting questions in the chat. So as Lynn says, do please put your questions in the chat, or raise your hand, which you can do in Zoom via the reactions button in the bottom toolbar. So we can just close the slide so we can see everyone when we start the Q&A.
Yes, I'm looking at that now. Wow, lots of chat. Thank you to everybody for those chats. Yeah, let's close the so we can see everyone. Yeah.
Great. So I'm going to go to Martha from KPMG first for a question around this current moment and kind of why now, and how to convince CEOs and leaders to start investing in learning. So Martha, would you be able to turn on your camera and ask your question to Lynda?
Yes, absolutely. Can you hear me? Yeah, I think so.
We can hear you, yeah.
My question would be, why is now a good moment to ask your CFO or CEO to invest in learning? They might be preoccupied by the upcoming recession and how to kind of overcome that. So what would be your argument to tell them to put some money into training regardless of that fact?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Margie. And in a way, I wanted today's session to give you a little bit of ambition around that. What I would say is that we're moving into a recession. I mean, that's a double dip, really. We've got automation and a recession. And organizations are really going to be focusing on high value work and high value employees. You know, and we used to think that all the high value employees sat at the very top. I mean, as you know very well from KPMG, they sit right the way through the organization. So, you know, retaining and upskilling people is going to be really important. I don't think that companies will want to go a lot into the external labor market. I think you'll want to develop your own people because of the costs of development are so high. So I would partly make it an argument about internal development. Now is the time for us to really boost the internal people. I would focus on your mission critical roles, which could be right the way through. I think this notion of escalators of mobility is very interesting. I mean, it's a new concept. I hadn't seen it before. I'm going to write about it. I'm writing about it right now. I'd certainly talk to a CEO about that. And I'd say to them, look, you know, I know that you see jobs as the primary way of developing skills. Let me show you how we can maximize skill development from jobs. So that's where I would be if I was making an argument right now. And I'd also talk about online. You know, there's been a huge, which we haven't spoken of very much right now, but there has been a very large investment in online digital skills. All of us have learned to be digital natives. I mean, I'm running my Future of Work elective at London Business School in 2 weeks' time, completely digitally. So I've learned how to teach digitally. We've all become so adept at it. So I think it's also an opportunity, Margie, to really talk about how you're going to use online digital skills as part of that. Because remember, the people who made the transition in that marvelous US study, 3 things they had in common. One is personal initiative. The second is that there was some sort of job that, you know, motivated. And the third was they did have training. So I think really helping him or her understand what those elements are is going to be really important. So that's how I do it. I don't know if anyone's got any other thoughts about that. If you have, just put your hand up. How are you making, I think Margie's point is a really important one. Does anybody have, or if you put it in the chat, anyone got a really good way of talking to your CEOs about making that investment at a time when, as Margie said, you know, there's lots of other things on their mind right now. Any other ways that you're helping that investment decision be made?
Nothing in the chat so far, Lynda, which would indicate that it is a challenge. It seems that a lot that is shared by a lot of people. But staying on this question, just expanding it out a little bit. So you mentioned on the job learning and the importance of that to the learning agenda. And of course, as you said, there's also potentially going to be rising unemployment, more people out of work. And I'd be curious to hear from you how that changes the equation. How, in a way, what's the responsibility of the organisation on the job learning in a world of perhaps potentially mass unemployment?
Yeah, So I'm moving my own agenda at the moment, and you'll see it in my next MIT, to low skill work. A low pay work. I think that, you know, we know what to do with our high potential people. They can sort of, you just have to stand back and let them get on with it. You know, and if you can mentor them and coach them, then that's even better. I think the real issue is medium and low skill work, which tends to be low paid work, and where transitions are very, very difficult. And governments are playing quite a role there, but we're not seeing a great deal of examples of organizations playing a role beyond the technology companies that we've spoken of. And I know that we've got TCS on the line, and they've done quite a lot as well. So, you know, in a world where inequality is rising, and in a world where your CEOs often have signed up for the ESGs, one of the ESGs is around inequality. And so, you know, we in organizations have to play a role to help people make transitions. And we need to do that with our own people with regard to the skills transitions we help them with, but we also need to do it with the broader ecosystem. And I think that if we don't do that, we're going to be held accountable, by the way. I think that's one of the ways that you will see some of your governments regulating on that. They already are. They're going to continue to do that, particularly in countries which are highly regulated labour markets, as you have, for example, in Singapore. And so I think it's really important that we do that, Anna, because as you said, it's the double dip of automation and a recession. And anything that companies can do to both upskill their own people, but also upskill in the labour market is I think, going to be very important. And I'm watching out for that. So if anyone's doing stuff on that, please drop me a note specifically about what you're doing, because we're looking for role models right now. But I think, you know, inequality, I think there's, as you know, I follow three major trends when it comes to the future of work. I look at technology, demography, and social trends. Every single one of those trends, left to their own devices, leads to greater inequality. And inequality doesn't work for any of us. It certainly doesn't work for those that are at the bottom of the inequality equation, but it doesn't work for us either. So how we think about skills development as a way of reducing inequality is part of what your CEO has signed up to when they signed up to the ESG goals.
Great, thank you, Lynda. And one final question I want to just close on is around the role of the individual. So of course we've heard a lot about the organisation, about other institutions, but of course particularly in a longer working life, individuals have to have that sense of kind of motivation around learning. And so I'd be curious to hear from you on whether you feel the current context has impacted that, and what your advice would be to us all as individuals when it comes to thinking about learning.
Well, I think that the pandemic has really kick-started for lots of us learning. We learned how to do digital. You know, London Business School professors, for example, had always said we can't run any of our programs virtually. We can't do that. It's impossible. Well, in fact, we did, and it is possible, and it actually works pretty well. And so, you know, I think we learned a lot during the pandemic. We learned about our families. We learned about our communities. We learned about what not to do. You know, one of the things that you're telling me is that people are going to less meetings, that things are happening faster, that all the work that you were doing on Agile is suddenly, you know, is suddenly worthwhile for you. So I think that we need to take the learning that we've got during the pandemic and really accelerate it. I think this is going to be, you know, if you look at the history of change, sometimes you get these catalytic moments that really boost and change a society, change an organization, change an individual. And this is that moment. So I think all of us need to think about ourselves as lifelong learners. And it's interesting that a number of you said in the chat, we're teaching people how to be learners. I remember talking to one of the ministers in Singapore years ago, and because Singapore gives money to individual citizens to learn. And I said, well, what are they all learning? And he said, well, you're not going to believe it, but they're learning how to speak Korean. And I said, well, why does people in Singapore want to learn how to speak Korean? Well, I don't know if any of you know the answer to that, but it's because the best shows are Korean, and they just wanted to listen to them. They didn't want to have to read the subtitles all the time. And I said, well, does that bother you? And he said, no, we're using the money to encourage people to learn. And once they become active learners, then they learn more. And I think that's really what's happened. We've become active learners, and now is the time to learn more. But don't forget that whilst we highly paid individuals might not see higher paid jobs as a motivator for learning, for anybody in your organizations who's in a low or medium skilled job, a paid job, being able to be paid more is a massive motivator. And that's why navigation is so important. If you can show people what they have to do to get a better job, most adults, I speak now as a humanistic psychologist, most adults will be prepared to learn to do that.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much, Lynda. And I would also echo the positivity of Korean TV shows on Netflix. There's some very good ones for everyone to check out. So as Lynda says, our next webinar in the series will be on resilience. So of course, with the third lockdown that we're going through in the UK here and other countries still in restrictions, this responsibility of organisations to help their people manage uncertainty and build that resilient mindset to help them craft a path forward into a future that will be uncertain in so many ways, as we've explored. So in this webinar, the managing directors of HSM, Emma Birchall and Harriet Molyneux, will be speaking with an organisation to understand how they are starting to solve this challenge and building that sense of resilience in their people. And that will be held on the 16th of February, as you can see there. So we will send out more information on that after the session, along with a pack that will give you a summary of some of the insights that Lynda has shared, alongside some case studies and articles for you to start working on right away. But thank you again for all your insights in the chat, all your questions. I hope you have a lovely rest of the day, hopefully in better weather than I do have here in Scotland. And we'll see you all in the next webinar in February.
Bye, everyone.